This lecture on sowing and planting is based on chapter 16 of the book by Villalobos and Ferreres, Principles of Agronomy for Sustainable Agriculture. In this lecture, we will start first reviewing which factors affect crop emergence. Then we will see what are the decisions the farmer has to do related to sowing. We will discuss the calculation of seeding rate, and finally we will talk about transplanting of annuals and perennial plants. The main factors affecting crop emergence are, first place, seed viability, which means the fraction of seeds that will germinate after being in a suitable medium. Seed viability depends on reserves and starts to decrease just after harvest. In general, seed viability will be larger in larger seeds. In some cases, the presence of seed coats does not allow germination to proceed, so it might require escarification, which means the breaking of seed coats by chemical or mechanical treatments, or stratification, which is putting the seeds under moist, cool conditions between 1 and 5 degrees for a long period. They both will improve the germination percentage. Apart from viable seeds, we will require an adequate soil water content. This is because germination starts with seed imbibition. And seed imbibition requires withdrawing water from the soil and also a good contact between the soil and the seed. Soon after imbibition of the seed, the first observed process in the seed will be the radical expansion to ensure the supply of nutrients and water to the seedling. The third factor affecting crop emergence is soil structure. The existence of a surface crust or soil compaction above the sowing depth may prevent or delay crop emergence. This is worse when the soil is dry, as the penetration resistance is increased when the soil dries. Under these conditions, we may need to irrigate or increase the seeding rate. If we irrigate, we reduce the penetration resistance, and by increasing the seeding rate, the seeds will help each other to overcome the soil compaction. Then, crop emergence depends on temperature, responds positively to temperature. And we can calculate the time from sowing to emergence using a thermal time from sowing emergence like that shown in table 16.1. Here we see for different species the total thermal time and the base temperature for the sowing emergence period. I have highlighted with a green background those crops which have a high base temperature, which would then be more adequate to spring plantings. For instance, castor bean, cotton, cucumber, melon, maize, etc. Crops not highlighted would show lower base temperature and would be therefore more suitable for autumn-winter plantings. Here we see the process of that goes from germination to emergence. Germination would be the emission of the radicle, the breaking of the seed coat. Then we would have growth of the radicle before any observable thing. At C, we would observe just the hypocotyl breaking the soil surface. And here we would have, from C to D, we will have crop emergence, which means the appearance of the crop above the soil surface. We would actually see first the cotyledons, or the epicotyl in the case of monocots, and later we would observe the appearance of true leaves. Apart from having soil water, suitable temperature, crop emergence is much affected by the presence of pests or pathogens, and that might require the application of soil or seed treatments with fungicides or insecticides. This attack of biotic factors is critical during crop establishment, which means that from the time of sowing until the seedlings are fully established, the attack of pests or pathogens might be fatal for crop establishment. In the oxygen concentration in the soil is also important for crop emergence, as respiration is the basis for the use of seed reserves and the starting growth of the seedling. If we don't have, under conditions of flooding with low oxygen concentration, respiration will be reduced, and so will be the use of seed reserves. Now we will discuss which are the decisions the farmer has to make related to sowing. First, the method of sowing, then the sowing date, the amount of seed, in other words, the seeding rate, the sowing depth, the planting pattern, row distance and plant spacing within the row, and perform the additional operations like fertilization, irrigation, application of pesticides, or tillage. The first and very important decision is the sowing date. And with deciding the sowing date, the farmer wants to match the crop cycle to the best environmental conditions in his area. According to sowing date, we can classify crops in two categories. Autumn sown crops are able to withstand frost and grow at low temperatures and have a low base temperature. That includes winter cereal, some oilseed crops like rapeseed, flax, legumes like faba beans, beets, etc. Spring planting crops show a high base temperature and include corn, cotton, soybeans, sorghum, many horticultural crops, etc. This type of crop may suffer from injuries from low temperatures without reaching frost. That is called chilling injury. The advantages of early sowing date in temperate areas are several. For spring sown crops with earlier sowing, we improve water use efficiency because the crop will develop under lower vapor pressure deficit. Also, grain filling will be improved if it occurs under temperatures that are not too high. With early sowing date, we can finish the crop cycle before the autumn and the onset of low temperatures that would stop physiological activity of the crop. That might happen, for instance, in cotton. In cotton also, rainfall during the autumn would be bad for the cotton quality. In terms of prices, early harvest of many horticultural crops will provide better price. For instance, for melon, watermelon, etc. For autumn sown crops, early sowing date might be an advantage for cereals in very cold areas. In those areas, planting occurs during the end of the summer, which allows the crop to grow and acclimate to very low temperatures before the temperature goes too low. But early sowing date might have disadvantages too. For autumn sown crops, the effects may occur much later than sowing. For instance, if we sow very early, the risk of frost might increase for the case of winter cereals. In that case, it's better to use winter types, which require vernalization, or sow later. That's what happens with wheat here in the Guadalquivir Valley, where we use spring type wheats, so the sowing date is rather late than it used to be in the past. We sow now in December, while in the past with other genotypes the sowing date could be as early as October. If we sow in the autumn, early sowing might mean low soil water content if the rainfall has not started yet. Therefore, autumn sown crops may have to wait for the start of enough rainfall in the autumn. For spring sown crops, the main disadvantage of early sowing date is the low temperature at sowing. That low temperature will increase the duration of the sowing emergence period, and this period should be less than 15-20 days. Otherwise, the competition or the attack of biotic factors, pests, and diseases can be fatal. Also, under low temperature and very slow seedling growth, we will have a reduced competition the crop versus the weeds. In this table, I have calculated, using the data from table 16.1, I have calculated for Córdoba the duration, the mean duration from sowing to emergence if we sow wheat or maize during the 12 months of the year. Here in blue I have marked those months that are suitable in terms of growing season for this type of crop species. For instance, we see that we can sow wheat in October, November, or December without exceeding the 15-day maximum duration from sowing to emergence. We see also that from March to May we could sow maize without exceeding the 15 days threshold. If we sow maize earlier than that, the duration of the sowing emergence period would be too long. Another important decision by the farmer is the seeding rate, and that is affected by the seeding cost and the planting density. In general, the total cost for seeds in the farm is small in relative terms, although there are some exceptions. In any case, it is important to avoid very low density. And also it is important to use high quality seed. The seed quality is measured or is given by viability, which is the germination percentage, the purity, the proportion of the seed belonging to the acquired cultivar, the health, the seed should be free of pests, diseases, and weed seeds, and the size. Both the percentage of emergence and the initial growth of the seedling are proportional to seed size. So if we have to decide, it is better to use bigger seeds than smaller seeds. To calculate the seeding rate, we use this equation where QS is the seeding rate in grams per square meter, PU is the mass of a single seed, grams per seed, dP is the desired planting density in plants per square meter, F1 is the seed viability, the fraction of seeds that germinate, that should be more than 0.9 for certified seed. F2 is the fraction of emergence over viable seeds. F2 depends on the state of the soil at planting, on the sowing depth, and environmental conditions after planting. Under adverse conditions, F2 will be proportional to seed size. That's one of the decisions about seed size should be, if the conditions are not good, then larger seed size will be better or will be more important. In any case, if the conditions of the soil at planting are bad, the sowing depth is too deep, or the environmental conditions after planting are bad, F2 may be reduced. Now remember, when we talked about the responses of crop yield to planting density, that we have basically two types of response: parabolic response with an optimum plant density, or a hyperbolic response. The hyperbolic response is more usual for biomass, and the parabolic response will be more frequent, like here, where we remember the idea that under high fertility, the planting density, or the optimum planting density, should be higher than under low density. Also, the response of yield to plant density when we have hyperbolic responses is different for long cultivars and for short cultivars. For long season cultivars, the optimum planting density is lower than for short cultivars. In other words, for short cultivars, we should use a higher planting density than for long cultivars. Here we have a view of an experiment with sunflower plants at different planting densities, with a short cultivar to the right and a long cultivar to the left. It is clear that the short cultivar does not fill the spaces as much as the long cultivar. So the long cultivar can stand lower planting densities and attain maximum yield. To calculate the seeding rate, we use this table, which you can find in the book, where for each crop we have the mass per seed in milligrams, we have the plants per square meter, the desired planting density. These are average values. In the table of the book you can find an interval for each one, and using this data I have calculated the seed rate in kilograms of seed per hectare. The total seed rate for different crop species is quite variable and goes as low as 0.11 kilograms per hectare of seed for tomato, also very small for melon or pepper, and as high as 2,700 kilograms per hectare for potato. It is also very high for garlic white type, going close to 1 ton of seed per hectare. For cereals, barley, wheat, we are close to 100 kilograms per hectare. Using that table, we can calculate the seeding rate. For instance, we go first and get from the table the mass of the single seed. In the case of wheat, the average is 37.5 milligrams. The desired planting density on average is 150 plants per square meter. We are using high quality seed, therefore we can seed viability of 0.95, and we assume very good conditions in the soil at planting and after planting. So we have a high fraction of emergence of 0.9. We apply these values to calculate the seed rate, and we come up with 6.5 grams per square meter, in other words 65 kilograms of seed per hectare. We have also to decide the sowing depth, and to calculate the sowing depth, or to decide the sowing depth, means taking into account the trade-off between temperature and soil water. Temperature decreases with depth, while soil water usually increases with depth. Oxygen concentration, aeration, also decreases with depth. So if we go too deep, we will have more water, but we will have a cooler condition. If we go closer to the surface, we will have a higher temperature, but soil water might be limiting. The deeper that we sow, the more time we will require from sowing to emergence, and the more research will be spent during that period. Therefore, larger seeds tolerate deeper sowing. The typical range of sowing depths could be as large as 15 centimeters for large seeds, and as shallow as 2-3 centimeters for very small seeds. In the case of very small seeds, as we sow shallow, it may require additional irrigation to keep the seeds moist. An extreme case of sowing depths is that of wheat in the Pacific Northwest in the USA. In that case, the seeds are put at depths of 15 to 20 centimeters, like in this pot, where this is an experiment with deep sowing of wheat, putting the seeds at 15 centimeters, and here we see the plants emerge. In fact, the ones emerging are already true leaves. The sowing methods are basically two: broadcast sowing, where the seeds are distributed randomly in the field, or row sowing, where the seeds are put in a row. The broadcast sowing may be performed by hand using a centrifugal fertilizer broadcaster or using an airplane, like in the case of rice. It may require further operations to bury the seeds, or to improve the seed-soil contact using a roller. To bury the seeds, we can use a harrow. Broadcast sowing implies a higher cost of seed and poor distribution uniformity in the field. Also, it will show irregularity in sowing depth, and therefore in the time of emergence of the crop. So the crop will be not too uniform in the end. More typically, we perform row sowing with distances between rows between 15 cm and 1 meter. The actual distance between rows will depend on weed control. To do that, we may use pair lines where we put couples of lines separated with interrows enough for tillage for weed control. Row sowing is typically performed in furrows with seed drills that do the following operations. First, they open the furrow, they drop the seed, and they cover the furrow. This is a case with pair lines in maize. We see that there is here enough space for doing inter-row tillage. And this is a drawing of the first seed drill invented by Jethro Tull in 1733. At the time of planting, we might decide on performing additional operations like irrigation to reduce the effects of surface crust or to keep hydrated small seeds when shallow sowing. We might decide to perform tillage, prepare the seedbed using harrows, for instance, cover the seed if broadcast sowing, or using compaction with a roller to improve seed soil contact and also to increase soil temperature. At this time, we might decide on applying fertilizers or pesticides, and the fertilizers will be typically applied before sowing during seedbed preparation or in bands when sowing. Here we see a harrow doing the preparation of the seedbed. Well, this is a broadcast fertilizer spreader that can be used also for broadcast sowing. And here we have a roller, so the seeds are dispersed behind the tractor and the roller increases the contact between the seed. Here, the roller will improve the contact of the soil with the seeds. Here we see a roller compacting the soil after sowing. Transplantation of annual crops is very common for horticultural crops and only for rice in the case of extensive crops. Transplanting might be needed if we have very expensive seeds or the seedlings are very delicate. So the seeds are first sown in the nursery and their first growth will occur. In general, we will use high density. Some cases thinning may be required, and under the nursery we will have better conditions because temperature will be higher and the plants will be protected against the wind, and that improves or accelerates development and will help protecting delicate plants. Here we see plants growing in a nursery, very high density, and here we see the transplanting, in this case pepper plants. And here we see a picture of people transplanting rice. In the case of trees, the principal or the critical risk of death is related to desiccation when we transplant the tree. We might do bare root transplanting for deciduous dormant trees or transplanting with the root ball for perennial trees. In any case, we have to take into account that soil compaction will prevent or will reduce root growth So breaking soil compaction by tillage before planting the trees will be important if needed. The best conditions for transplanting will be in autumn, as soil temperatures are still high, and that improves the rooting of the plants during part of the winter. Better with no leaves, the transplanting is better with no leaves, as that reduces the risk of desiccation. Here we see the transplantation of a citrus tree. It is transplanted along with a root ball. And here we have the transplanting of with a bare root tree that would be applied to any type of deciduous dormant tree.